Welcome to How Is This Legal? Where in each episode we crack open the books to find outlandish legislation and regulations that make you ask, how is this legal? If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Here to break down what these laws mean to you is your host, Kyle Lorraine.
What is going on, everybody? I am Kyle, I am your host, and this is How Is This Legal? We have a really exciting show planned for you all today. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit of money laundering is sort of our substantive topic, but we also have a few questions about life that I'm interested to get my guest opinion on. My guest today is Mr. Austin Cordell. He's a fraternity brother of mine, good friend. Him and I still keep in contact just about every week, almost every day. And we're going to be talking about a little bit of what society has told us about how you should live your life or what ceiling you should live your life under, the confines you should live your life in. Cordell is a very high achiever, especially for a quote-unquote millennial. He has always been an example of someone that can set a goal, execute a plan to achieve it, and then achieve the goal and enjoy the benefits of it. And I think that's really inspiring, and I think there might be some people listening, or maybe you know someone that could use a little kick in the ass, and I think this might be a good conversation for them to listen to. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome my guest, Austin. How you doing, buddy?
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me on. And just in full disclosure, so I am a millennial. I think the official cutoff is 95. I was born in 94, but happy to represent that crowd for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I know it's a real fickle definition of what is a millennial.
Yeah, it is. I've always wondered who decides the hard line on those generations and how it gets decided, or if it's all just arbitrary, I suppose.
Yeah, and everyone has a different definition of it too, because some people say through 1981 to 95 is a millennial, and other people so that would be my brother's generation, and they consider themselves Gen X or Gen Y.
Right.
So it is a really fickle definition.
Yeah, so my uncle was an Air Force fighter pilot for 35 years, and so if you look anything remotely under 35, you're a millennial in his eyes, and the root of all the problems in the world. So,
ain't that the truth? So while we're on that topic, like I said in the intro, you one of those people that has always been sort of an inspiration to others around you, because you kind of set all these goals that a lot of people say are ridiculous, or you shouldn't be able to achieve that, or you can't do that, and you have a really good ability of proving them wrong. So I'm curious where that determination and drive comes from. Is that sort of just an innate quality you have? You don't know why you feel like that? Or is there some sort of outside influences that made you that way?
Yeah, so obviously you know me pretty well. We were in the same fraternity and everything. But, I've kind of had a really interesting mixture of exposures in my life. And it's kind of been consequential in kind of helping me understand the world from a perspective of and we were just talking pre-pod. I love when people tell me I can't do something. It's great fuel to kind of put into focus what you really want to do and why you want to do things introspectively. So when I was in the short of this story is I was born with legs that are pretty jacked up and was never supposed to walk. So I was 2 years old walking on my knees because my legs, the structure of my muscles was messed up and they couldn't support me. So obviously my parents were, pretty worried and very concerned. Went to tons and tons of different doctors, orthopedic surgeons and things. We lived in Omaha, Nebraska at the time. And all these doctors just said, very frankly, I would never walk. And it's kind of a corny story too, but, my parents are awesome because they kept looking and kept looking. And one of my mom's friends suggested we go to Shriners Hospital in St. Louis. So Shriners hospitals are all over the nation. They have burn hospitals too, and they take care of kids that either have very exceptional kind of health issues with, muscular deformities, musculoskeletal deformities, burns, things like that. And there's no charge to the patients at all. So it's kind of like a research hospital too. But anyway, so we went to see Dr. Schenecker. And of course, this is all secondhand. I don't remember any of this, right? But went to St. Louis for an appointment with him after my mom's friend said, hey, go check out Shriners. Sat me up on the table, looked at my legs for, 30 seconds, and then just like a quarterback in the Super Bowl said, oh, yeah, we're going to get him in braces, get him fit up in those. He'll be walking in a year. We're going to start PT and stretching those legs out. And then we're going to start this surgery and then this surgery and then this surgery. And just very matter of fact and very, kind of scientific and practical about how we're going to fix it. which I think is really interesting to hear, even secondhand, that they've been to so many doctors that say, there's nothing you can do about this, and this guy just came out blazing with a plan and then executed on to. So that's always kind of been a struggle with me. So obviously growing up, you can't go outside when you're in a wheelchair. Having operations and everything when you're a kid, it's not fun. But I was lucky because I grew up in a good neighborhood with good parents who were grounded, never really got bullied for it or anything. And that just kind of helped me put into focus in my life that, you're not always given the best circumstances, but I'd certainly complained and cried a lot back then, because you're a kid and it sucks. But thinking back to that experience, I think that really was something that I kind of got strength and passion for through my parents, just to understand now as an adult how much they had to do and how much they had to put up with and go through just to keep looking for, some sort of help that would help me live a normal life, So I grew up, had multiple surgeries. They got me fixed up, played hockey, played lacrosse, I was in marching band, carried big drums. So, I can live a normal life now, and it's special to me. I know my legs are going to be messed up, later on down the road, but at least I've had the opportunity to be good to go so far. So that's kind of always been, I guess, the initial driving force for me is just taking that experience and realizing that, for one, you can draw a lot of strength from your team, your parents, your family, and everything, if they're behind you and supporting you even when you're young and can't really do it yourself. So,
wow, that's a great. I've actually never heard that story before. I knew you had.
Yeah, usually I just go with the shark bite story.
Well, I knew you had problems with your legs when you were younger, but I didn't realize it was such a long road. So how long until you were able to get up and walk around? How old were you?
Yeah, so
He can walk now.
Yeah, I'm good to go now. So after braces and kind of getting the muscles kind of structured to a point of where, right, because when you're growing too, the tough thing with that is you're still growing. You're trying to fix these bones and these muscles that aren't, fixed, and the kid's going to keep growing throughout childhood. So the science in that was trying to keep braces on me so I could walk at least normally-ish, or waddle, I guess. And then my first major operation was in first grade. And I've got a wicked big scar, and this is where the shark story comes in. It's like 14 inches on my right leg. So I don't have a kneecap in that leg either. So your kneecap just protects all ligaments in your knees, from what I understand. So you don't really need it structurally. But that operation was in first grade. I missed pretty much all of the school year that year. So my mom would go to school, on Monday, pick up all my work from my teacher, and I would just be homeschooled that whole year. So on and off had surgeries through 7th grade was my last one. And so just, a series of putting in staples and plates and everything to kind of keep the muscles aligned and keep the bone structure kind of where it would need to be so those muscles could develop properly to kind of structurally work as normally as they could. So I've got a little bit of a limp, and it's certainly, nothing to complain about because I can walk and do everything normally. But all in all, I think the last surgery was in 7th grade, and I still stretch every day. I stretch half an hour in the morning, half an hour before I go to bed, and stretch my legs out just to, keep them fresh and malleable.
So overcoming that was obviously very difficult as a child, and as you said, that was sort of a basis for you being able to overcome a struggle. It was sort of laid the groundwork very early on. Do you still sort of not rely on that strength, but do you think that formed a basis for you to sort of build on in terms of setting new goals that others might think are impossible?
Yeah. So, and I think, and also too, I keep talking about my parents, but I have really unique parents, and you've met both of them. But
yeah, they're pretty awesome.
Yeah, but they're total opposites, right? So my mom went to business school, and she's very business savvy, very technically smart, I would say, approaches everything logically. And my dad's just life of the party, very socially intelligent, always a fun guy to be around. Starts food fights at Dad's weekend at the frat house and crazy things like that. But I was blessed to know them. So my mom grew up in Herculaneum, out in the sticks, and she came from a pretty high-achieving family. So she's got, a lot of teachers in her family. Her parents were pharmacists. My aunt plays in the St. Louis Symphony. So they're certainly very good at what they do and kind of just innately driven. My dad is too, but he came from kind of less favorable circumstances. So grew up in Pennsylvania, in an inner city, St. Louis, and had a pretty rough go. His parents split up. He had my half brother when he was 15 years old. So came out the gate early being a dad to my half brother and having to kind of accept those responsibilities. But I think that also kind of fired him up to be his own boss. So I think he worked for a company for maybe 2 or 3 years, or maybe a little bit longer, and then realized that he doesn't ever want to have anyone tell him what to do at work. So he went out and started his own business and was pretty successful at that. So I had really good upbringing, so I had a good balance of, my mom kind of putting that importance of education and all those sorts of things, but my dad also being there and kind of reminded me to have fun. And, I'd be in pain and crying or whatever. He'd come in and just crack jokes or, call me a baby or whatever, and just kind of keep the mood light. So I think more importantly than kind of what I was going through, right, because when you're a kid, you don't have those introspective thoughts of, like I'm in pain, like this sucks, like I'm not in school, I want to see my friends and everything. But they did a really, really good job of kind of monitoring, me and my development and just kind of being there for me and supporting me and kind of keeping me focused on, why is this happening to me, but also too, like where are you going to go when this is all done and kind of where is this going? So.
Gotcha. And like I said, that's an awesome story. And I think it's a good metaphor for the way you've lived your life too, because, you've had, and I think sort of innately too, you've done a good job of surrounding yourself with other positive minded individuals because, like sort of just thinking about our group of friends, there's definitely a lot of people that you didn't gravitate towards that you could have because, they were in your pledge class or, in the same social circle or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's, like one of those deals where you figured out early on that those aren't the type of people that you should be associating with because they're not propelling you forward. They're holding you back. And that's something that I've had to sort of figure out in the last, few years is that you do have to pick your friends very carefully. You can't just sort of associate with everyone and just assume everything's going to be okay. I think I got really lucky, meeting people like you and some of our other friends that are very growth-minded, very positive individuals that want more out of life. So it's easy to sort of take it for granted, and then obviously going to law school, you're making a whole new group of friends and stuff like that. So I'm very picky with friends, and I'm sure people get aggravated about it. But, quite frankly, I don't care because you want to find people that are going to help propel you forward. And I've always had the benefit of that with having a great family and whatnot too. So I think that's certainly something you should be considerate of, is who you're associating with. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was, so you had the good positive family influence and sort of this internal drive. How did you feel whenever because let's be honest, the school system at like every turn sort of just tells you what you can't do. It's a lot of, you're not going to make a lot of money doing that, or
right.
Maybe you should be more realistic with your goals and whatnot. So how do you confront that? Because I'm sure you still might hear that from colleagues or maybe family, not your parents, but maybe other family members or friends or whatever.
Yeah, so I think kind of, I guess, my background for your listeners too. So when we went to school together, so I double majored in criminal justice and accounting. And so growing up, I always wanted to be a police officer because I always liked the idea of just helping people that really couldn't help themselves. And I think that probably comes from my dad. He's a very big-hearted person, but always kind of had that goal in mind, right? So you get older, you go through high school, and I've always been a researcher. I love to kind of know what's out there. So got to high school, figured out where I was going to university, got in. And so from there was figuring out, okay, I'm definitely going to study criminal justice, but what do I want to do with that? Kind of what are the next steps after college, after I graduate? So started looking at different agencies. So, local police, state police, and the feds. So I kind of ruled out local police from the get-go just because I don't necessarily think there's a really good challenge for people who necessarily would want to just be continuously experiencing different things. So, if you talk to police officers, they'll tell you no 2 days are the same, right? Which is very true. But I just think that I was very much more interested in kind of the analytical kind of digging into things and figuring things out, as opposed to, handling day-to-day calls with, people in your community, which is a very important job, but not really something I was super passionate about. So then kind of had my heart set on working for the feds, because, that's really the best platform to kind of get into an agency and really solve some big problems with some very highly capable people. So, your professors, when you start out, everyone says they want to go work for the feds, right? But it's you have to be a very well put together, a very well rounded individual, right? Because any federal law enforcement officer, any agency, you have to go through an extensive background check. They'll detach someone to look through all of your background, see if you lied about anything. You'll have to take a polygraph test. You have to take a psychiatric test, a physical health test, everything. And it's just so many hurdles, and the process takes like 18 months. So you got to be serious about it, and you got to know it's what you want to do when you get to school to be able to have that option even on the table. So I had my heart set on that, and talking to different students and different professors. People always say, like, yeah, I want to work for the FBI, but it's like, dude, you got no chance. Like, you don't even come to class. Like, you don't take it seriously. Like, that's not going to happen. So and for me too, talking to my professors and everything, I will say mine were pretty decent at, being realistic with those expectations up front, and understanding I was serious about it too. But there was always that kind of like, yeah, kid, like everyone says they want to work for the feds, like it's not going to happen. Which honestly I think is a great fuel, because, when someone tells you can't do something, that should, and you're passionate and you're serious about it, that should just fire you up to prove them wrong. So kind of married that with the accounting degree, just because business is something I'm interested in. Grew up in a household where my dad ran his own company. Mom kind of ran the finances, so I was comfortable with it. And frankly, that's just a good kind of marriage of academic disciplines too, right? Because I think, as we'll talk about later with money laundering, that's a huge piece to, federal investigations, because money is a definitive instrument that's going to lead you to a path and information it is what it is. It's very black and white. So I guess just in summary, having those people around you who say things that, like, yes, I want to work for the FBI or Secret Service, U.S. Marshals, but they don't take it seriously. To your point earlier too about picking your friends, I think that's good to have that kind of realization of what people are about, and if they're serious, and if they are serious, then those are the people you kind of cling to and stick together with, and that's what kind of elevates you as a person. Because sure enough, I can think of the kids in my classes in CJ who were more motivated, more serious about it, and sure enough, they're working at state agencies and killing it out there. So.
And you interviewed with the U.S. Marshals too. I don't know how much you can talk about that, but did you sort of enjoy that experience, or because I know you don't work in the you don't work for the Fed now, you're not a U.S. Marshal, so as much as you can, what were some of the things you liked and sort of disliked about that experience?
Yeah, so I did an internship in the summer, and so that was my sophomore year of college. Did that internship. And so that was at the courthouse down in Cape Girardeau, so pretty small operation. There were 4 deputy marshals and 1 supervisor down there. So spent that summer with them. And so the U.S. Marshals, the reason I wanted to kind of get exposed to that agency is because they do a lot of different stuff. So one of their big roles and why they're in courthouses is because they do judicial security for federal judges and magistrates. So they kind of act as the protective arm, I guess, the quasi-Secret Service for the, executive branch and judicial branch is kind of one of the roles they do. They also, frankly, look for a big part of it is operationally looking for fugitives that other, agencies like the FBI office in St. Louis might call down with information about someone that might be, down in southern Illinois or southeast Missouri, and they'd go find them. So lots of opportunities there and kind of a lot of different things to experience. So I think that was good for me to kind of see what the day-to-day operations were like. And certainly too, when you're an intern, you're not doing all the sexy stuff like going out there, busting down doors, going on, warrants and things like that. But just kind of getting exposed to those guys, and seeing what their life's really like and what they do and what they're about was definitely a good experience for me to kind of get a real view of what that experience is like.
I think one of the funniest stories to come out of that experience was Cordell and I lived together at the time, and he was telling me about this internship, and we're all really excited. And he's always been sort of a secretive guy, and we're all thinking like he's a secret agent working for the U.S. Marshals this summer and stuff like that. And he's like, I'm really excited about this, but it just sucks that I can't drink all summer. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, like, what if they call me in the middle of the night and they're like, hey, we're going to bust down somebody's door right now. We think we found this guy. He's like, I got to be ready to go. He's like, if the LZ is hot, I got to be ready to go. And I'm like, seriously? I'm like, you can't drink all summer? He's like, yeah. He's like, it's just something I'm going to have to deal with. Like, right at that time, he got up, went to the grocery store, and he came back with a 12-pack. I'm like, I thought you couldn't drink all summer. He's like, no, you dumbass. You really think they're going to call me before they go bust down somebody's door? Like, hey, let's pick up the intern on our way.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll never forget that story. That was one of the funniest things.
Yeah, unfortunately, I never got that call. I always looked for it, always waited for it, but it just never seemed to come to fruition.
Hey, guys, I got my phone on.
Yeah.
So, still got my number?
I made sure they know every day when I left the office. I'll keep it on for them.
So now that you work in the private sector, do you think you like sort of the path you're on now better than working in that agency or working for the FBI or something like that?
Yeah, so and one thing too with the feds is like I said earlier, it's very competitive to get in there, and certainly even if you have a very high GPA and you're very well rounded and had a bunch of different experience in college and different organizations and things, you really, really, really have to be an impressive individual to apply, green out of college and get hired, because they need people with very specific skills and very, specific experience and things like that. So that's kind of what guided me to look into the private sector and kind of go into the corporate business world where I am now.
And what do you do now?
So I'm an audit analyst at Energizer, the Pink Bunny battery people. So working under their finance umbrella, doing auditing for compliance and also for operational stuff. So it's been a great job for me and great experience too, right? Because we go to a bunch of different affiliates, and so it's all internal too, which is nice. So it's all Energizer locations, right? But going to places like Malaysia and Singapore, Poland, Mexico City, I got trips coming up to France and Germany. So going to these places and meeting all these different people and looking at all this different stuff, working on very interesting kind of projects sometimes, kind of helping to solve problems that they're having, or maybe kind of bridge some connections between corporate St. Louis and those offices too, is kind of the space that we work in. So it's been good for me from a development standpoint, to just kind of get that broad international business experience for one, and kind of that interpersonal human experience too of learning how to work with people, how to work with different kinds of people, how to, small things like researching cultural nuances in Jakarta, Indonesia before we go there. Because, those are the things you don't think about until you start doing it. But when you're there, you certainly want to make a good impression on them. So if something's important for them, you kind of have that in the back of your mind, kind of do that research beforehand. So, you're minding your P's and Q's and kind of setting a good impression, and teeing up a good way to have a strong foundation with those kinds of people. So.
Did you have to learn that the hard way? Did you piss anybody off or embarrass yourself on one of your first trips?
Yeah, so Mexico, no.
Damn it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, that's good, though. That's definitely an astute thing to do because it's something I probably wouldn't have considered, but other cultures are so much different from us, and it's hard to realize unless you leave.
And it's absolutely crazy, too. And so you would think that, another thing that was kind of a shock to me, I guess, just being naive. So you see all these big companies, and you think they're crazy efficient and work very, very well, and they do to a certain extent. But in a perfect world, every office that we have, every sales office would do everything exactly the same in exactly the same manner, and it'd be easy to kind of monitor and control and everything. Everything is completely different because, business environments are different, culture is different, how business is conducted is different, access to markets is different. So you have all these really unique challenges in all these different places that have to be addressed individually, and it kind of rolls up into this big organization that is successful and does really well, but there's just so much that really you don't see until you get out there and kind of get exposed to it.
Good little side story I heard on the way up here. I was listening to Mind Pump, the fitness podcast. I talk about a decent amount. Easily my favorite show, but they have like a current events section at the beginning of most episodes. and they were talking about how there was this program. I don't know if you ever heard of this, that American Airlines rolled out. I don't know how many years ago, but it's quite a few, maybe like 5-10 years ago. And their like highest spenders were eligible to join this program, where like for $250,000, you would be able to get free flights for the rest of your life. And it was like people like Mark Cuban bought one, and then you could add like a companion for like another $150,000. And I don't know like how many millions of dollars they've lost from this, but it's unbelievable. There was like one guy that went to Japan like 1,000 times over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, you could go anywhere in the world. And then there was another guy that like had the companion program, and he was like selling his tickets to.
Ooh,
like,
that's smart.
Like bring people, like a little side hustle, like bringing people with him, or like selling his own ticket and stuff like that. But
was that against the rules?
I don't know if it was, but I think they ultimately figured out that they were losing so much money, so they were trying to figure out a way to breach the contract. But it's still like sort of to your point about like how a corporation, you would think it would be like ultra efficient, still has like, it's still people running it, so there's still going to be like some internal things that could be done better, right?
Yeah, surely their legal team would have looked over those agreements and kind of talked to finance to figure out if we're going to make money or not. But that's a good example of I don't think they did.
And I don't know if they expected people to like just abuse it so much, but like I'm kind of surprised I didn't consider that though.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, that's a really good example of things that you just kind of don't think about and you think are handled. And I think kind of that's where one of the big challenges is in a big organization, right? Is you always kind of assume that other people have it handled. And sometimes you just got to ask like, hey, is anybody looking at this or worried about this? And sometimes the answer is no.
So I know you're working for Energizer now, and I don't know what the future holds for you, but do you think you'll ever go out on your own, or do you think you'll always kind of be working like within a bigger company?
Yeah, so I think I sincerely do want to end up in some kind of government service at some point. I think it's kind of always been my intrinsic drive to be the person that people go to when they have problems, or be the person to kind of tackle those problems for them or help come up with solutions, or just kind of be a mediator. So I think that's a good platform for me to put those kind of skills I've learned through my professional career so far to good use. I don't know what kind of capacity that would look like in the future. So I'm kind of limited by, my legs and everything, so I would never be a field agent, I don't think. But intelligence is something that interests me. So maybe somewhere down the road, having some opportunity to work in that kind of setting would be probably my long-term goal.
Gotcha. Yeah, I didn't know if you would. I don't know what you would be doing if you started a company, but I was just kind of curious what the motivations were. But yeah, that makes sense that you would go back to the whole government service thing, because it's definitely something that's like a passion, because you can make way more in the private sector.
Certainly.
As far as financial success, but that's a good way for you to really make an impact. And I know how much you like being a narc, so I'm sure you'll end up back there.
Yeah, and I think it's just important too to kind of, somewhere down the road, I do come across something that I'm super passionate about and want to start my own company. Certainly, that might be in the cards. I'd like to keep my options open and kind of live day to day, but also at the same time, I'm a planner, so kind of keeping that long-term goal in mind. Sometimes it shifts, but I think the general trajectory is just for me to be fulfilled. Just kind of always having my hands in different things that I feel like are really making a difference, or, helping enhance me as a person at least.
Sure. So I think that's a sort of a good segue here. We can pretend like we're federal agents trying to track down some money launderers.
Let's get them.
Probably going to be talking about some of the processes of money laundering in this episode. By no means are we advocating for the practice. We're just talking about some of the things that people have done that obviously weren't too successful because they ended up getting caught eventually anyway. But just getting started, there's a few facts that I found that were I thought were pretty interesting. So Al Capone is in large part, or widely considered, one of the first people to do money laundering on a large scale, and he did it by having an all-cash laundromat, is where he laundered a lot of his money from illicit activity, and that is in part where the term money laundering came from, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Al Capone, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's 3 stages of money laundering, which we can sort of address more in detail, but just laying them out there. The first one would be placement, and that's just buying a business and placing large sums of money into the business's bank account. Obviously, this is the easiest way to get caught because there's sort of a large influx of cash at one time.
Right, and you want a business that's cash heavy too, right?
Sure, and if you just buy a laundromat like the Breaking Bad example, and then put like $10 million into it, you're probably going to raise some red flags.
Right. That's a nice laundromat.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I bought a car wash in Breaking Bad, but you know what I mean. You get the gist. And then the next example is called layering, and that's having multiple sources of income or businesses in which you can transfer the money between, sort of making different layers. Another practice is buying properties such as expensive cars or real estate, but that seems like a way you could kind of draw attention to yourself. Casinos are another popular way to do this too. People will put their money into like a casino chain that's like international, and it's a way for them to move the money around and clean it. You know, they'll pay the dealer so they always win, stuff like that. And the third stage is integration, and this is sort of the stereotypical type where you have like a business and you make fake invoices and send the money to yourself or invest a large amount of money into the illegitimate business, start a charity, put yourself on the board of directors with a huge salary, stuff like that. And then in closing with my little laundry list of facts here, the money laundering wasn't recognized as a federal crime until 1986.
That late?
Yeah, and before this time, well, that's why like Al Capone was caught on tax evasion, and why we would always see like mobsters getting taken down for like conspiracy and things like that, conspiracy to defraud the government or, you know, whatever it was, because they didn't have anything to prosecute them with. So now that they have this these anti-money laundering laws in place, the government just needs to show that some sort of concealment has occurred, which obviously led to a huge spike in the prosecution of drug dealers and war criminals and stuff like that.
Right. And so from an investigative or law enforcement standpoint, right, so money laundering is super interesting to me because money rules the world, right? So if you're a criminal enterprise or, you know, if you're just a regular person, right, everyone needs money to live to a certain extent. So when you have these criminal enterprises who are laundering money, you know, they're getting their dirty money through drugs or arms trafficking or anything like that. So they're trying to clean it through, you know, intermediaries or fake businesses or, you know, buying exorbitant real estate, stuff that's super marked up that should never be, you know, it's sold for what it is at market value, but it's just juiced up so they can clean that money. But from an investigation standpoint, right, money laundering is fascinating to me because it's very black and white. So, you know, and you could speak to this better than I could, but if you get the right subpoenas for information, follow that right trail, like it's a trail that's there that you can follow. So cash too is interesting. So trying to trace those transactions. And so I know the FBI has a ton of people who are CPAs and savvy, you know, financial and accounting people who kind of focus on that practice. But, you know, it literally touches every kind of criminal enterprise. It all comes back to money. So understanding that whole process is a superpower tool in the investigative toolbox.
Definitely. And I think I would imagine now, because I don't know, you know, I've never tracked down a money launderer or anything like that, but I would imagine now that it's much more difficult to get away with it than it was back in the day. Because if you just had if everybody was making giant cash deposits like back in the 30s and 40s and stuff like that, it's probably much less suspicious if you were doing the same as opposed to now. Because now is if you deposit over what is it, 10 grand in cash,
10,000.
They put you on that watch list or whatever for how long.
Government report, yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like back in the day would have been the prime time to do it, but it probably wasn't as widely known that was a good idea back then either.
Yeah, and it's a complex thing too, right? So, and I guess just as an example, the U.S. banking system is massive and huge and has a lot of moving parts. And so big banks that have a certain amount of assets under their control are responsible for monitoring their internal controls and having anti-money laundering practices in place, right? So they have monitoring systems for that $10,000 limit for cash transactions or withdrawals or whatever it gets reported. So they have these tools that are really just kind of there to flag for the big institution, which is, you know, a good place to start. But listened to a podcast recently, I know we both listened to it, about an anti-money laundering professional who has kind of taken those basic flags, as they're called, and then building more complex scenarios that are real world applicable. So being able to identify trends in banking transactions that are more realistic to, if they're flagged, come to fruition as an actual money laundering event. as opposed to just, checking a box on, hey, this transaction was $10,000.
Yeah, and like in that same episode, it was on the Jordan Harbinger show, and the professional that was on there that was speaking to these different types of ways that like these criminal organizations are using either trading like weapons or whatever. It's all coming back to money laundering. So one of the things that I thought was super interesting from that was they were talking about how whenever there's like a war in like Latin America or like West Africa or really anywhere besides like one that a major country like the U.S. or whoever is involved in, that they're always using AKs, AK-47s, and a lot of them are Russian made. And I think the big misconception was that they're using those because they're, they would always say, well, they're easy to fix. You can fix them with a rock and a stick or whatever. But I think a lot of it was because they were covering up like massive money laundering, and they're selling weapons to everyone around the world to sort of cover up other things they're doing with drugs and whatnot. So I think it's sort of interesting how much money laundering goes on. Because a lot of reports, or actually no one knows how much actually goes on per year, but they estimate it's in like the hundreds of billions of dollars that gets laundered every year.
Oh yeah,
and it presumably goes up every year too.
Yeah, I'm sure. And this crazy thing too with blockchain technology and all that stuff, I think is going to be a huge challenge from a law enforcement perspective of how do you get access to that information, right? So you have a system that's designed to be somewhat anonymized, be able to execute transactions to parties that you don't really know who's a party in that agreement or that transaction. So I think that's going to be a really interesting development here in the future, just how much blockchain is going to impact, cryptocurrencies or whatever, but also from a legal standpoint, how law enforcement's going to approach, or realistically how they can even touch managing that or getting out in front of it to get processes in place to kind of be able to use those things if they can at all for their investigations, or if it's just going to be a black box.
And I wonder how like equipped the government is to handle it anyway, because do you remember when there was that shooter in San Bernardino in like 2015, and they were trying to get into his iPhone and they couldn't because it had like a passcode on it or whatever?
Right.
So I'm writing a paper now for journal. It's about like human augmentation and stuff like that. So I looked into like Apple is a good example of a company that has like secure components with their encryption methods and stuff like that. And it turns out that they had to pay a like individual called a gray hat, because he's not exactly a bad hacker, but he's not sort of a good hacker that's employed by a company to expose flaws. He's
more the
sort
good
of
guys,
in the middle.
White hats and red hats.
Yeah, I think it's white or the good guys, and then I think a black hat would be the sort of just like the dark web hackers. So anyway, they had to pay this guy to get into this iPhone, and more of the research I've done, I was discovering that like an iPhone is one of the most secure pieces of technology like available today.
Isn't that crazy?
It's even crazier when you think about how many people have them. It's like hundreds of millions of people have them, and they're one of the most secure things. So if the FBI couldn't get into an iPhone, how the fuck are they going to get into blockchain technology and figure that out?
Yeah.
And also, like, did you see that Senate Judiciary Committee stuff with Zuckerberg?
I saw bits and pieces of it, but didn't watch any of the testimony.
Just some of the questions the senators were asking were just hilarious, and they were like talking about like
pretending they knew what was going on, or
like one guy was asking about like how Facebook makes money, like that was his question, and Zuckerberg was like, well, we sell ads. And this one guy was saying that he's like, so if I go on WhatsApp Messenger and then I transmit a message to someone and then an ad pops up, how are they not reading my information? He's like, we don't read any information in WhatsApp. And he like just kept having to repeat himself. And the guy's like, well, where are the ads coming from? And he's like, they're targeted based on what you're searching for in other mediums. It's not just WhatsApp. And then there was like another senator that asked, like Senator Orrin Hatch asked how do you make money on the internet was like one of the questions. And it was ridiculous. But
ads, Senator, like I just said.
So it like, and I'm not saying like everyone that works in a governmental capacity is wholly unequipped, but it's like sort of as a whole, like if we can't even get into an iPhone without having Apple or like some, like the rumor was it was a company in Israel, but I'm pretty sure it was someone stateside or like someone in Europe that was able to hack this.
Yeah.
This like one individual. But like if they can't do this without getting the help of like some random guy or Apple, it's like, how are they going to crack blockchain,
Yeah, and I think that's a real challenge too, right? And so, you have legislators who have their staff and their teams that kind of prep them for these conversations, but you have Mark Zuckerberg there testifying to Congress for, some of the most hot button issues on privacy right now. And, these lawmakers that, for what it's worth, do their best, I'm sure, but, asking those kinds of questions of how do you make money? Well, why don't you Google that before the testimony and really hone in on, if you're going to have Zuckerberg there and you're going to talk about privacy, spend some time diving into the technical stuff. And I get it's hard to be a jack of all trades in that role, but I certainly think, especially with technology and kind of confronting those issues, that wholly the U.S. Congress is a little bit aged out or maybe not interested enough. I don't know if it's probably a combination of the two. But it really makes you wonder how any kind of effective policy or even discussion could start to be had on how are we going to regulate this stuff? How are we going to look at blockchain? How are we going to handle, privacy and data privacy? Europe's got, or the EU's got their GDPR rolling out, so that's going to change the whole game over there, and it's going to have massive impacts for companies. I think for each violation they have of that, something like 4% of global revenues is going to be the penalty, which is huge, right? So these companies have a huge incentive to kind of mind their P's and Q's, right? But if you don't have the capability or the know-how to understand who's playing by the rules and who isn't, that kind of makes it hard to enforce that kind of stuff. So it's very curious, and I'll be interested to see where it goes, but I don't think that the cutting edge of technology and prowess is going to come from those sorts of bodies.
And I think that we're really muddying the waters too when you look at like the dispensaries and like the medical and recreational marijuana dispensaries. It's legal in like 26, 27 states now, and they still can't get like loans or put the money from. They can't put the money from their dispensaries in any bank that's regulated or insured by the Fed, which is virtually every financial institution. So unless a bank wants to take like a huge risk, then they have to find ways to legally, or I don't know if where it falls in this gray area of laundering money, which is kind of nuts because those, as marijuana, more evidence comes out about its health benefits, stuff like that. I mean, it's going to be federally legal eventually. I really do believe that.
Yeah, me too.
But in the meantime, it's like are we just gonna make all these people that are trying to sell this and make a living from something that's legal in their respective state under the government's thumb and not be able to use the money or have a hard time using the money from it just because it's still like federally illegal? It creates such a weird purgatory for these people. They can't get a loan, they can't get lines of credit, all that kind of stuff. So I think that when you have that many people that are trying to figure out how to sort of clean this money or put it in a bank account, it's like you have that many more people that are like engaging in practices which technically might be illegal, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because it's like, how do you monitor all these people and then catch the people that are actually, like the sex traffickers and like, the real pieces of shit.
Right. Yeah, and there's certainly, there are definitely people that run dispensaries or whatever that are dirty, that have dirty money that are using.
Oh, sure.
But I can't imagine that the majority of them are structured like that. But it's almost like it promulgates this, incentive to join the criminal enterprise when you have all this cash on hand. You can't deposit it in any bank because it's FDIC insured. You can't put it to any kind of use in the federal system or banking system, at least at large. So it's almost forcing these people who are, just opening a business and making money to figure out ways to, I don't know, just sock away a bunch of cash or how they use that cash.
And it makes them a huge target for robberies too, because it's like, you have a concentrated place and like most of them aren't that big. I've been to a couple of them in like Colorado. They're not that big, and it's like they have like armed guards and stuff like that. Which is kind of weird because like it's sort of a weird thing going to one anyway because it's, it's not legal everywhere and whatever else. But then like you have armed guards there because they get robbed like a lot because, they might have 20, 30 grand in cash like on any given night.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see sort of, how that all shakes out. I think you could do like plenty of episodes on that particular topic just because it's so interesting that it's just such a pissing contest between the federal government and state governments.
Oh my God, it's just so frustrating. Like, who gives a shit? Honestly, like it's the fact that still Schedule One's a joke. The fact that we play this wishy-washy game between the feds and the states of, we're not going to allow research for it from the CDC. We're not even going to have the open conversation, but we're just going to let these states that are bankrolling huge amounts of money from, tax revenue on it. We're just going to let them keep doing what they're doing. But in Washington, we're just going to keep chirping that, it's bad, whatever.
Exactly. And like even in like the, not to get too much into this, but I mean, while we're on the topic, even in like the states where it's not like, it's like in Illinois where I live, it's medically legal and like decriminalized, but that's not recreationally legal. And like the biggest token that the Democratic candidates for governor have is that they're going to make it legal in Illinois. But, as everybody knows, Illinois is still in like a huge budget crisis. Like, I mean, I see it most often in the roads because it's like people always bitch about the roads in like LA and like places like that. I think they're the worst in Illinois, especially Southern Illinois. Like they'll just rip out like giant chunks of the road and just won't replace them for like 6 months.
What?
It's crazy, dude. It's like the Wild West. But it's like, how does a state like that not automatically just push that through? Why does that have to be like until we get a new governor?
It's a cash cow.
Exactly. And like if there's any state that could use it, it's definitely Illinois, especially Southern Illinois too, because like it's so skewed towards Chicago and the north part of the state that like they just sort of get like the trickle down, government spending for schools and stuff like that. So
yeah,
I don't know. I don't understand why it's even like a question because it's like it's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's not bad for you. It's better for you than alcohol, and all these different like benefits they're finding from it. And it's like they still want to just suppress it for like these arbitrary reasons.
Yeah. I think certainly big pharmacy or whatever. It's so cliche to say, but they've certainly got a vested interest in ensuring that it doesn't go legal anytime soon because it's going to wipe out a huge chunk of that business for, painkillers and things like that. But I just think it's so ridiculous that I think it's the CDC's like forbidden from even researching or having access to research like studies on marijuana, so they can't rule on it like or do anything. And that's just so absurd at this point. It's like a huge elephant in the room that like no one even really cares about. So it's like, why not just let it happen?
Well, it was interesting because like going back because we went to Colorado over like my Christmas break. So like we were there for like around like New Year, and like most people like it's not like a big deal because like marijuana is legal. So it's like it's just like going to the store and buying like a case of beer. Like it's just whatever. And it's not like I kind of expected to see like sort of everyone like using it like all the time and stuff like that, but like they do have like the city like ordinances where like you can't be like just like you can't walk around with a beer everywhere, you can't be like lighting up a pipe everywhere, which is good, like because if you're not into that, you should be able to go to the grocery store, whatever else.
Yeah.
But there's still some people there that are just like so like against it and like mad that it happened. There's like billboards everywhere that like talks about like how like there's been a spike in people in high school like using marijuana or something like that. And it's like, no shit. Like, if you can have someone go to the store and buy it, of course there's going to be more people using it.
Right.
But it's just funny, like, how it's just always such a polarizing issue for no reason because it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I don't understand why it's so polarizing, too. Everybody's got their vices and, just let people do what they want. It's not even practical to just have this, like, stupid back and forth argument, in my opinion. But, that's kind of where we find ourselves.
Definitely. So creates a huge problem for them from the money laundering point of view.
Yeah.
So if you, from like your limited expertise, like what would you look for if you were trying to catch someone that was money laundering, or like if you were trying to, like say hypothetically you were trying to catch someone embezzling money from a company or something like that, like what are like, do people typically do it in like large sums and like think nobody will notice, or is it like they're skewing like pennies off the top of a dollar like in Office Space?
Yeah, so I don't, that's an interesting question. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, obviously, and a lot of different ways, that people can do it. So, and criminal enterprise runs the gamut of very organized and highly competent to just like kids on the street that are just dumbasses that think they're smart and then get caught doing stupid stuff. So I think going back to just the fact that money's traceable in our system and this blockchain is going to completely wipe that out, I think, just things to look for, obviously, that's something that kind of gets onto law enforcement's radar for, specific reasons. So whether it's like the SEC or something, or, the FBI is looking at this organized criminal unit, and of course they're going to try to get some money laundering people in there because you can't be a big organized criminal unit without, having cash flow to run the whole operation.
Sure.
So just kind of, I feel like it's almost like a secondary investigation most of the time. or perhaps just kind of a road to leading investigators to kind of the big fish that they want to get to. Money laundering is a good way to do that because it really paints a picture, right? So accounting is the practice of kind of looking back at previous transactions and kind of road mapping that. So if you can account for cash flow, or estimate like what amount of cash flow or would be needed to run this kind of operation with the knowledge that we have, that kind of helps investigators paint a picture of, okay, where do we look at next? Who do we go talk to next? Kind of be able to work from the ground up, I suppose. But it almost seems like that's, in these big cases, that it always ties back to money, at least at the beginning, because that's kind of where you get your best information, I suppose, for kind of how you want to build it.
Sure. And like sort of going back to the last topic, I just thought of something. When you were saying how like big pharma is probably like pushing a lot of this like anti-marijuana agenda, did you see that Bayer Pharmaceuticals just bought Monsanto?
Yeah, was it like 80 something or north of that?
I think it was like 90 something billion, wasn't it?
Yeah, something's insane.
Yeah, something crazy. But like, I mean, that we can go back to the money laundering thing in a second, but that's got to make you wonder, like, they got to be preparing for this to go legal federally, because then they have all these fields to grow it in,
Right.
Because then if their pain medicines and ibuprofens or whatnot gets knocked out, then they have a whole other source.
Hey, yeah, and if you can't be top dog, consolidate with the top dog and at least have that revenue stream. So it's a really interesting merger too, because you're right. It's marrying that agricultural development with the pharmaceutical industry. So that kind of makes me wonder if they think somewhere down the pipeline it's going to be federally legal, and maybe they're going to lobby for it, but then they'll have the most capable enterprise to kind of take hold of that market and get a monopoly on it.
Yeah, I think so too. It's really interesting to see where that goes. All right, so if somebody's money laundering, they're most likely going to be caught on the back end, because it's not like you can preemptively catch someone in the act of doing this.
Yeah, and I think also too, it's just following information. So once you get those access to those bank records, or I guess just estimates of where stuff's going, it almost seems like whenever people get caught, so in the political environment we have in the U.S. right now, just kind of some high profile cases of things that aren't even that. It seems so black and white and not even concealed, or well concealed or well monitored or anything. But it almost seems like, also in a lot of cases, small things or small mess ups kind of open the door for, and you can speak more to how this process works, because I'm not in law school, but at least getting some kind of information or charge on the books that can open you up to more discovery on, I don't know, subpoenaing witnesses, because you have information on one small instance of money laundering that can kind of help you build your case.
Yeah, typically if like police has some sort of opening in terms of like like the $10,000 thing, for an example, like if you would leave that, you just continually deposit $11,000 or $12,000, just creeping over that line a little bit, and you're doing it like multiple banks, and like you said, it's so easy to track, especially with everything being tied to like your social security number and stuff like that. Then they would probably have probable cause to get a warrant to like search their place, and they might find like more money, or they might discover like some sort of evidence of a conspiracy in terms of like if they're buying up a bunch of like used car lots or whatever,
Yeah.
and trying to do it, then it usually is just like one sort of small thing that criminals do that leads them to get caught like time and time again. But I think what's kind of interesting about that too, though, is that like we were talking in class the other day, because I've only taken a couple criminal classes, but the criminals that you read about in like opinions and stuff like that are always the stupid criminals. Like you hardly ever read about like the people that had it going for like 40 years.
Because they don't get caught.
Exactly, because they don't get caught, which I think is so funny, because like another thing I heard sort of related to this, so like we were talking about school shootings and stuff like that on one of the other episodes, and I kind of looked into more of like what makes people sort of like act on what they hear on the news and stuff like that, because I thought it was kind of interesting. And successful bank robberies usually don't get reported, or almost never get reported. And I don't know if it's like on the books like a law, or if it's just like a company policy, like they don't want the media to report it. But there's like evidently like 50% of bank robberies never get reported because they're successful.
Really?
Yeah, and it's not like people coming in there with like
what's the disincentive there for reporting?
Because they don't want, I don't think they want to give away the like one, they don't want the customers at the bank to like worry that their money's in danger, right?
Yeah.
And two, they don't want to like give out like details of how it's done to encourage other people to do it, because money is something that's so powerful and everyone like needs it. So if they were
Yeah.
giving like sort of specifics out like they are for like the school shootings, like that would probably encourage more people to do it, which like, you know, I get it's like two completely different things, but evidently a lot of them don't happen from this thing I was listening to the other day. They don't happen like with people running in with like a president's mask on. Most of them are like at least half, if not the majority of them, happen by like someone just walking up and slipping the person a note and saying like, give me $100,000. And then they give it to them and then they'll leave. And a lot of times people that work at the bank don't even know they're being robbed. Like that person will leave and then the teller will be like, we just got robbed.
Yeah, but don't they have like buttons under the
Yeah, they do, but I think like in certain situations where it's like if the guy like has a gun and he's like, give me this, I have a gun, and they're like gonna hit the button, by the time they're like, unless they stall for some reason and like sort of turn it into a volatile situation, then like the police aren't gonna be there in time anyway, right? So like if you have like, unless you have like a 30-second response time, and like it shouldn't take you that long to give the criminal the money. So I think they've just kind of figured out that like pragmatically they can't sort of control it as much as everyone leads on to be, because there's not many successful ones that are like in the movies where they're like shooting up the ceiling and stuff like that, which sort of blew my mind.
Yeah, well, and that's super interesting too, because I'm pretty confident the FBI has jurisdiction over bank robberies.
I think you're right.
So
that could be why it doesn't get out as often too, though.
Yeah,
because they want to keep like their investigative process sort of in house.
Yeah, that's curious. I don't know, and now I'm kind of thinking too, like what I would do if someone slipped me a note and said, "Give me all the money."
I think I'd probably just give it to them. I mean, like,
for sure.
If they're like, I have a gun, like it's not worth dying over someone else's money.
You want to like mess with them though a little bit, like, hey man, let me go see how much is in the vault, and come back with like one stack and give it to him, and be like, all right, so I got this to start. Is that good enough?
So we're cool, right?
Yeah.
And what I was thinking too, though, like, what if you just like, you're like, oh, I got to go to the vault to get that, and just never came back?
Well, and that's what I'm saying too. And then you know that gives you the opportunity to be like, hey Kyle, you know, the teller next to me, hey Kyle, do you know how to get into the big vault? Yeah. All right, hey man, we'll be right back. Take everybody and just close the door.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting topic, though.
Yeah, probably not easily, performed when you're in that kind of situation, though.
Yeah, and I think like the paralyzing fear, like it could be one of those deals where like if you steal something from a store, they're not supposed to chase you because of like potential tort liability and whatnot. It's probably like the same thing, you know, like if you feel like your life's in danger, just give them the money because they can just print more anyway.
Yep, print more of it every day.
Awesome. So, yeah, I think we got a decent amount of topics covered in this episode. Is there anything else you'd like to sort of go over with the whole money laundering issue?
No, I just think it's really interesting, just kind of as a practice at large too. Just kind of something to watch out for in the future. You know, I don't have a huge amount of confidence that our legislative branch will be at the forefront of kind of handling all this blockchain stuff, and being on the front end of the anti-money laundering kind of regulations and methods and technologies that are going to be needed. But definitely something that'll be interesting to watch out for.
For sure. I think we should definitely do some sort of follow-up once like the crypto technology sort of develops more and the government figures out a way that they can sort of stick their fingers in it and regulate it. Because, I mean, it's going to happen eventually.
Well, it's crazy, and it's got applications to everything too, right? And so even with accounting, so blockchain accounting is something I've read a couple articles on, right? So if you have your company, so you have your set of books, you have your customer, so you have their set of books, and you have your vendors, and you have their sets of books. So just kind of a thought experiment of having blockchain technology, or at least a blockchain network between those three, links of the business system. You know, you could have that synced up, and all transactions are going to be in the blockchain that just accounts for itself. So, you know, that's something that's just kind of kicked out there, just kind of interesting to think about. But just the kind of capabilities that blockchain just as a standalone technology has, and all these different applications, is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be interesting to see how that develops and like sort of more of the applications that people figure out either criminally or for the good. So we'll have to be on the lookout for that in the future.
Are you invested in Bitcoin?
I'm not. What about you? You're the big investor guy.
No, I'm not.
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it because like my thing is like once I have extra money to start investing into things, or like once I start investing into things, I think property and real estate will probably be my first sort of go at it because, like it always appreciates. people are always going to need somewhere to live, so it's one of those things that's not going anywhere anytime soon. The thing I worry about with the blockchain is like, I feel like the government's just sort of waiting around for an opportunity to either heavily regulate it and sort of devalue it by getting rid of the core technology of like only producing so much currency,
Right.
like if they kept printing it sort of like our dollar, then it might end up being worthless anyway. And I also worry too, like there's nothing, and this is a different conversation too, there's not much backing the American dollar, but there's nothing backing cryptocurrency.
Gold at Fort Knox, man.
Yeah. So I get nervous that, I'm going to put a substantial amount of money into this, and I get like, you can't be too risk averse, right? Like you have to have some risk to get a larger return. But I would worry that I'd put all my money into this technology, and then it either like just disappears or like gets phased out by a newer technology, or just something like, happens along the way that like makes it worthless. That's it just crashes one day. Would be my biggest fear.
Yeah. And it's so unpredictable too of where this is all going to go, right? And that's a big reason of like why I haven't gotten into it yet. I thought a lot about this too. Like maybe soon I'll start getting more into that and dabble. But I think for me, my personal number is probably going to be like 10% of the money that I invest. Maybe I'd throw into cryptocurrency because that's, it's not nothing, but it's at least something to kind of diversify and give me an interest in at least following the conversation.
And I think by the time like I would get to the point where I'm going to invest in it, it's going to be a little bit more of a clear picture of like what it looks like, or like sort of the relative safety of investing in it.
Yeah.
Then maybe I'd be more interested. I don't know though. I'll have to wait and see.
Yep, you and me both, my friend.
Well, thank you for taking the time and allowing us to use your house here for this interview. It's quite enjoyable. We got into a variety of topics. We'll have to do another episode sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for coming up from Carbondale to visit. And, it's been a lot of fun too, so appreciate it.
And to everyone out there listening, thank you for all those leaving reviews and rating the show. Can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And as always, thank you for listening.
And we are also now on Spotify as well, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I forgot about that. Yeah, we are no longer on SoundCloud because nobody listened on there. So now we're on Spotify.
Making the big moves.
We're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and YouTube. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you for listening to How Is This Legal? If you enjoyed the show, help others find us by clicking the subscribe button, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, and sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Come back next time to find out how is this legal?